As the ban on Twitter usage in Nigeria enters its 5th day, the government continues to threaten citizens and institutions that have insisted on accessing the microblogging site with prosecution. On Monday, the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, in an interview on BBC Africa Focus program, asked how the government would proceed with the prosecution of people who defy the Twitter ban, with particular reference to the General Overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, RCCG, Pastor Enoch Adeboye. The minister replied that Attorney General of the Federation had made it clear that if anyone violates the ban, such a person will be prosecuted, and it was within, in quotes, the realm of the Attorney General to determine who or who not to prosecute, end quote. RCCG, through Adeboye, had said tweeting was in accordance with the United Nations Charter on Human Rights. In the same vein, Pastor William Kumuyi of the Deeper Life Christian Ministry took to his Twitter to say his church will continue to operate its account on the platform because of its global audience. But with the courts in the country closed due to the ongoing strikes by judiciary workers, both the federal government and Nigerian citizens are faced with a dilemma on how to prosecute violators and how violators can seek legal remedy, respectively. Here to discuss the legal quagmire in which Nigeria finds itself over the Twitter ban is Liborous Oshoma, a lawyer and social commentator. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Tudu.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, Liborous, good morning. Well, let's start with the argument that is out there that the suspension of Twitter is illegal, is unconstitutional. If you could help us break that down for our viewers.
Yeah, first and foremost, permit me to quickly, before even going to the suspension, to read Section 36, subsection 12 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, please. Subject as otherwise provided by this Constitution, a person shall not be convicted of a criminal offense unless that offense is defined and the penalties thereof is prescribed in a written law. And in this subsection, a written law refers to an act of the National Assembly or a law of a state, any subsidiary legislature or instrument under the provision of the law. We are not aware that this ban, there is either an executive order or any act of parliament that gave rise to this ban. What we are aware of is the fact that it was just a pronouncement by the Minister for Information. At some point, they tried creating a divorce between the office of the presidency and the president. And then also, if you go further, if you look at Section 22 of the Constitution, please also permit me to quickly read Section 22 of the Constitution because it's very germane in discussing these issues. Section 22 of the Constitution states, and I would read, that the press, radio, television, and other agencies of the mass media shall at all times be free to uphold the fundamental objectives contained in this chapter and uphold the responsibility and accountability of the government to its people. And so it's also a notorious fact that the opposition, the PDP as an opposition party, is almost non-existent in terms of calling the activities of government to order or in terms of holding the government accountable to the fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policy. And so people over time had taken up this responsibility and used these other media outlets as an opportunity to ventilate, not to even talk about the e-commerce nature of these platforms. And so by the president or the presidency, as the case may be, by mere pronouncement, banning the usage of Twitter in Nigeria, and the Nigerian Broadcasting Commission going further to enforce such ban, for me, is draconian, it is unconstitutional, and not backed up by any law. And I know that had answered your question directly. I just needed to lay a constitutional foundation to my answers.
You really ought to. Now let's look at the powers of the Attorney General under the same Constitution. I would imagine that his powers, or well, I don't imagine, I know for a fact, that his powers include instituting, prosecutions as he pleases, as he chooses. But there's a caveat there, isn't there, which I'd like you to expand on. Those actions that he's instituting, those prosecutions, have to be in the enforcement of a law in a competent court. He cannot create his own law, the same way as he cannot create his own court in which to prosecute. Can you expand on that, please? That's
why I read section 36, subsection 12 of the 1999 Constitution, under the subheading fair hearing. In enforcing the powers of the Attorney General, in enforcing such powers, the powers must be enforced under a law, a subsisting law. The Attorney General cannot just sit down and say because he does not like Liborous Oshoma or he does not like Tundu Victoria Abiola, and so for that matter, he's going to go to court, he's going to charge them to court. When there is no law, the case of, it's even elementary, the case of Alko and Fagbemi, every law student in legal method is taught that you cannot charge somebody for a criminal offense that does not exist. So it is not in the words of the Attorney General to say, I have the powers to prosecute, and so I'm going to prosecute people because the president had said that they were going to ban Twitter. Even in France, because it is always very common for us to refer to these areas where countries have had challenges with hate speech and threatening to ban Twitter. Even in France, what they did was to enact a law. And after enacting the law, the Constitutional Court in France that reviews laws now reviewed the law and even struck down some sections of that law on the ground that it gave arbitrary powers to the government and the microblog owners without the powers of a judge to actually review whether an offense had been committed or not. In India, what has been happening is the fact that there's been back and forth between exchange of correspondence between the Indian government, the Ministry of Information Technology in India, and Twitter. They've been pushed back and forth from January till date. And so I do not think that the president can enact law by mere fiat. And if we now encourage Mr. President, or an Attorney General is encouraging Mr. President to do that, what the Attorney General is gradually doing is stating that he does not owe his allegiance to the Constitution, but his allegiance to the man who appointed him, despite the fact that he's sworn, oath of office under the Constitution.
Let's dial back into even this pronouncement. The Minister of Information came out to say this. He went further to say OTTs will be registered now. Which law backs up the registration of OTT in this country? I'm saying over-the-top mediums.
You see, what we failed to do, really...
No, I'm still trying to make a point. And even if you review the NBC code that the NBC looked at, was it substantive enough for the NBC to say, okay, it's based on this code that we are now telling media houses to deinstall Twitter? Because when you look at it, there have been lots and lots of backlash as regards the NBC code. It is still very authoritarian. There is no robust deliberation before you even bring out the NBC code. And it's just being used as a ploy to torment media houses. So what's your take on that? And thirdly, please, will the Attorney General start by suing himself because he deleted his Twitter account and he used a VPN network? Will he start by suing himself?
You see, one thing, first and foremost, one thing the governments forget here is the fact that legitimacy is derived from the people. And how do you derive legitimacy from the people? By the engagement and social interaction. And here, you find a situation, let me start with the NBC, for example, that's supposed to be a regulatory body acting as an extension of the Ministry of Information. I had, at various fora, listened to the DG of the NBC on this platform, and with all due respect to him, I felt he was dictatorial in his approach and his answers to questions. These are my opinion of him. Until he changes his approach, that stands. And then secondly, I want to also quote Kadira Ahmed when she said that she would obey under duress, because the media houses seems not to have an option here. Even as we speak, the courts are on strike. So even if you want to ventilate your grievance, where do you go to? So what you have is a situation where people see themselves as owing their allegiance to the government rather than allegiance to the Constitution, where legal officers are afraid to interpret the provisions of the law as it is to their appointers. So that's why you find a situation where people now begin to interpret the law on its head. Take, for example, with the advent of new media, what we failed to do was to develop our infrastructure, whether legal infrastructure or technology infrastructure, to be able to accommodate or be a big player in the new world that we suddenly found ourselves. But there is no such infrastructure, and suddenly we are woken to the reality that other countries are regulating or are taking steps and with enabling law to regulate. And so now you say, not minding the commerce that your citizens are deriving from these platforms, and not minding the fact that you do not have infrastructure to provide alternative to your people, you now say, you know what, if you are not registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission as a company operating in Nigeria, then we're not going to you're not going to operate here. The first question you ask yourself is, are these company, are these entities domicile in Nigeria? These are entities that, operate now, in a new world, in the sky, permit me to use that word. So what have we done to ensure that there are alternative platforms for us, for our people, now that the world is moving to a knowledge-based economy and not the usual hard copies economy that we are used to? So I also look at the Twitter ban. I had expected that when you ban Twitter, you should have the infrastructure to even enforce the ban, apart from having the legal framework. There seems none. Like you just noted, and it's as read in the papers this morning, the Attorney General has violated its own regulation by having to access Twitter using the VPN to deactivate his account. And so, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. Are the Attorney General's hands clean in enforcing the rule that they have put in place? The answer is no. So how then do you now want people, the Nigerians, to trust you, to truly believe that you are sincere and you mean well in developing their infrastructural network? As we speak also, people have been, for 3 or 4 days now, have been counting how much Nigerians are losing, through this ban, running into millions of dollars. How possible is it for the government to cushion the effect of that hardship on its populace, a government that cannot provide jobs? And that's why I would want to quote the words of Governor Sanwo-Olu, that the governor should, and also like Doctor said this morning, that government should put ego aside and find a way to back down on this, and then you can now begin to talk about creating infrastructure. For as we speak now, there are no infrastructure to even enforce the fact that you say they should come and register, because they are really not domiciled here.
Okay, Liborous, let me bring up 2 issues. We have a story on the front page of This Day today, which says suspension to remain indefinitely until Twitter shows remorse, says federal government. Now, how should Twitter show remorse in this case? Because I found that curious. Is it that the Nigerian government expects Twitter to ban all Nigerians or as many Nigerians as possible from using the platform? And then President Donald Trump is also quoted in that same story as saying, yes, it's very good that Nigeria has suspended Twitter and that more countries should do so. Well, can the presidency, begin to quote President Trump and say, well, we have the support of Donald Trump, former U.S. president?
Let me start from the last one. It is shameful and outrageous display of irresponsibility if anybody in the presidency will rely on the support of Donald Trump. When Donald Trump called Nigeria a shithole, what was the response from this same presidency? And was it not the attitude of leadership and government over the years that made Donald Trump make such statement? And secondly, it's also a notorious fact that Donald Trump also had been suspended on Twitter and Facebook, had a pushback where he attempted to amend the law to query, permit me to use that word, this Twitter and Facebook. But at the end of the day, it didn't sail through. And so he was banned. Now, our president was just suspended for 12 hours We're talking about Donald Trump being suspended for 22 months here. And so, for a man like that who had attempted to use arbitrariness to do the same thing, he will be happy that in Africa, where dictatorial tendencies reign supreme, definitely they've been able to do that. And then secondly, that in the meeting that the Minister for Foreign Affairs had with the foreign envoy in Abuja, he did say that government were engaging with Twitter. But from the reports from Alhaji Lai Mohammed and what you quoted in the This Day newspaper, it is obvious there is no engagement anywhere, because the government does not even know how to engage Twitter on issues like this. Apart from tweeting, the request to pull down the tweet of Nnamdi Kanu was through Twitter. Now that they have deactivated Twitter, or they are deactivating Twitter, and it's obvious that they are helpless, they don't even know how to engage Twitter, unlike maybe they should consult the government of India, how they had been doing that. And then, so they are helpless, they are asking, they are ego tripping, and now asking Twitter to be remorseful. As if you, Doctor, if you remember, during the NSAS protest, the Western world vociferously told Nigeria that West Africa was not a priority for them now. And so they should also know that the tech giants gradually are beginning to rule the world, and the modern world and the senior societies are gradually realizing that there needs to be some form of curtailment. But here we are helpless because we did not even build infrastructure to do that. And I do not see the remorsefulness that Twitter would be remorseful, apart from the same tweet of Nnamdi Kanu that they complained of that had been deleted also. But I think government should eat the humble pie, find better way of engaging these tech giants, and to also ensure that you restrict the spread of hate using this platform. You have professionals that can assist you to do it. But rather than being humble enough to embrace this thing, open channels of communications and dialogue, you will find a situation where we begin to compare the president of a country to Nnamdi Kanu. And for me, that's shameful, that's an aberration, that's demeaning the office of the president of the country. And it's quite unfortunate, because you have people, you have the worst of us, really the best of us.
Oh dear. Well, because I don't take any threat lightly, I'm going to stay on this issue of prosecution, or the prospect of prosecution for violating this Twitter ban. It's extremely concerning to me personally. And I want to say to you, my learned friend, and our learned friends like the Attorney General and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, a reminder: lex prospicit, non respisit. The law looks forward, it does not look backward. I do worry that now we could see some kind of hurried law being passed with retroactive application. I'd like you to comment on that. And also staying on the House of Representatives, I'm sure you saw the row that erupted there yesterday when, in the sort of execution of their oversight function, they decided, the House, the Speaker did, that they would have this investigation and call the executive and discuss this matter and have a report in the next 10 days. The opposition party objected to that and said the federal government should be urged to suspend this Twitter ban pending that 10 days, because 10 days is an awfully long time. And I'm sure you saw the rest of it. There was a walkout and a huge row. I want you to comment on this and what this says about the stance of our legislators who represent Nigerians, whereas the Senate is completely silent so far.
I would want to look at this issue from two sides, two points of view, because some persons have argued that the step taken by the House of Rep was in order, on the ground that even when you applied for a stay of execution of an action in court, a stay of execution of an action that had been completed, and in most cases what the court would do would be that since the action has been completed, that status quo should be maintained. But in this case, that is a completely different scenario from what happened at the House of Rep. Why? I have my reasons. Like I cited the case of France. Even when France threatened to ban Twitter for not exposing sponsors of hate speech, of hate campaign, and the source of their information, they did not do that arbitrarily. They passed a law, and when the law was passed, the Constitutional Court also reviewed the law and struck down some sections of the law. What had happened is a usurpation of the powers of the National Assembly. But rather than the National Assembly standing its ground to say our powers to make laws have been usurped and you cannot take this step without an enabling law, The National Assembly that's why people would say that whatever the government does, the National Assembly is a rubber stamp. The National Assembly behaving true to type, set up a committee to report back to the House. And then the committee will report, the matter will be debated for other days. Meanwhile, Nigerians you have not been able to provide jobs for are suffering. So for me, I think the National Assembly, the House of Rep does not even know its powers. They do not know that the president cannot take such action without a law backing it. They do not know that it is their duty. If infractions had been committed, it is their duty, it is for the executive to make representations to them, and then an enabling law would be made. I listened to the speaker, the Honorable Speaker, Femi Gbajabiamila, saying that the investigation should find out if infractions were actually carried out by Twitter, and then if there's need for a law to back up the action. You cannot make a law now to back up an action that was carried out arbitrarily. You will need to undo that action, first and foremost, legally speaking, before you now begin to talk about looking at the issues, and then if indeed infractions had been committed and what should be done, whether you need to put a law in place to restrict, such occurrence in future. But just by voice vote or by resolution, of the caucus members deciding to set up a committee. We are used to committees here, and at the end of the day, that's why Nigerians do not have faith in these institutions. For people to have faith and confidence in the institutions, you need to do the right thing.
Liborous, now for advanced studies, this question is for advanced studies. You kept on talking about the French case. Now let me take you on the French case and segue into the St. Bernardino massacre case and talk about privacy. The St. Bernardino case, you remember how Apple said we will never open the phone of the St. Bernardino shooter because of his privacy. And look at also social media saying they were going to protect that person in the French case. For advanced study, how should we bridge a common ground? Because in the future, a case of privacy too will come up in all of this.
Yeah, well, that's why, for me, I think what government should do at this stage should be to unban. Look at, there's need for us, even the House of Rep, to employ experts in this case to look at how to protect users and the government, how to protect society from hate speech. It is not so that you also do, because Twitter over time will tell you that there is need to protect and protect freedom of expression. But in protecting freedom of expression, there are limitations, which is the same limitations rules that they have activated to suspend the president and then also to delete his tweet. So in those limitations, what the National Assembly need to do is to sit down with experts and look at critically our laws and find ways of ensuring that in protecting the freedom of expression, in protecting the freedom, the right to communicate, they are also, you should ensure that, those rights does not in any way impinge on the rights of others or the larger society. Right. But if you don't do that, we'll just window dress this matter until another one happens, and then there's excuse me, there's a post against the president or any other person tomorrow. They say, oh, hereby Instagram or Facebook or any other social media platform is hereby suspended. And quickly, if I may add this, they are not suspending Twitter simply because of the tweet of Mr. President. They said it clearly, openly, that they are doing this because of the NSAS issues, because Twitter was used by the protesters consistently to raise funds. So they saw it as a viable platform for young people that also can be used to mobilize. And so they are not happy when Nigerians come together to criticize the actions and activities or inactions of government. So people should understand that these are really what this government is angry about. Not just the fact that the president's tweet was deleted or the fact that Nnamdi Kanu's tweets were not deleted, but the fact that Twitter was a platform for mobilization, because for the first time they were shocked and surprised that Nigerians could come together, that despite their initial use of force, that the momentum was gathering, until they realized that there are social media platforms that the young people are using these days. And now they are confused. Ego has set in, and I would want to, I'm not pleading with the government, and I'm telling them that at the end of the day, it is Nigerians that if we do not handle this diplomatically, it is Nigerians and the young people who are using, including media houses, who are using this to interact and who are using this as e-commerce, that at the end of the day will be the larger society that we lost out of this.
What the government said, if we can return to that original statement, is that Twitter had consistently engaged in activities that undermine the corporate existence of Nigeria. In other words, if we interpret that, government will seem to be talking from the standpoint of national security. Now, okay, beyond the legalese, what the Constitution says, whether this is legal or not, can't a government take certain decisions on the basis strictly of national security? Yes. Because this is a country where we've been told that, national security is more important than the rule of law.
Yeah, a government can take a decision on the basis of national security, but it is the law of the land that determines what is national security and how that decision should be taken. Otherwise, we'll be descending into anarchy. A situation where national security is only determined by the man who is the president or by his advisor, that cannot be national security. National security is as determined or as regulated by the law. And that's why also national security is about trust. National security is about good governance. When they say actions and
equal and opposite.
Actions are equal but opposite. It is in some cases, the actions of government that leads to this reaction. And so people find comfort in these platforms. How, in all of this while, we have complained about the attitude of government during COVID, during lockdown, you see the National Assembly buying new cars in the midst of poverty. Do you think that people, Nigerians who are hungry, will look at those and begin to think of national security before even doing anything, whether meaningful or whether lawful or unlawful, to eke out a living? And then secondly, a situation where in violation of Section 15 and Section 14 of the Constitution, you hold some persons, you try to rehabilitate people who have carried arms against the state. What are you telling the people that are not carrying arms but have capacity to carry arms? What you're telling them is that it pays to carry arms. Is that not a breach of national security? So government actions over time have violated national security with impunity. And that is why people no longer have that confidence in government to cure the insecurity that they have so found. Even look at the Northeast, for example. Let's even start with Northeast, the national security now. The Northeast, over time, every chief of army staff that is out of office, there's always this question of funds meant for procurement of arms hanging over their heads. And yet, these are arms that are supposed to provide security for the people. And at the end of the day, there is haphazard investigation and the matter is swept under the carpet. In some cases, the person dies. And so, how do you now preach national security to a man who sits down in his office and criticize these actions? So, and that's why government, in providing national security, government attitude, government action should take the lead. And in taking the lead, you should regulate your activities according to the framework of the law. And lastly on this, today also during your newspaper review, the Christian Association of Nigeria had called on the President and the Attorney General to be mindful of prosecuting Adeboye and Kumuyi, that it will heighten the already heightened security situation in the country. Do you know that if the government decides to go ahead despite the tension, that will be the government itself, despite what the Attorney General did, that will be the government itself breaching national security. And then the reactions you cannot predict. So it is not enough to preach national security in vacuum. Government should sit down, weigh its actions and inactions, and then begin to talk about national security. Even its Twitter suspension, and people are losing money, and yet you can't provide alternative to them. Is that itself not a breach of national security?
Well, this is why it is entirely about legalese. A constitution is the fundamental principles under which a people have agreed to be governed. Now that there's no sort of recourse for Nigerians, now that we can wake up to violations willy-nilly and just have our hands tied, what exactly is that saying about our democracy? And where do we go from here? People like Serap have decided to take their case to ECOWAS. How long is that going to take? This is actually an extremely serious issue.
The people that are preaching national security have ensured that the courts are under lock and key. How do you ventilate your anger? How do you ensure that matters are resolved when there is such issues, or there is a threat to national security, or there are infractions to the law? How do you ensure that the matters are resolved? Is it not through the court system? But yet, the government is very comfortable that our courts are under lock and key. And yet you talk about national security. And so, a government that ought to approach even the other arm of government to put laws in place to ensure proper regulation. It's not interested in making the laws, but rather they are interested in sitting down in the comfort of their office to make a pronouncement and expect that the rest of us should just follow. For me, really, this is the danger in it. And that's why all of us, irrespective of the side of the divide that you belong to, whether for the government or against, we should look at the issues carefully. The issues here are, I'm not saying you cannot suspend Twitter if there are infractions, but there are procedures. There should be a law empowering you to do that. Because if we allow this today, gradually we are descending into a dictatorial nation where the president can do no wrong, where the president is not governed by the provisions of the law. The president will not govern by the provisions of the law. He asks rhetorically in that his infamous video, are we not governing according to the provisions of the law? This is one of such violations. There is no law at all backing up this action. And I think that if he truly believes he wants to govern according to the law, if the Attorney General truly believes in the entity called Nigeria and truly believes in the sanctity and supremacy of the Constitution, this is the time for him to sit down and advise the president that the law is sacrosanct, the law is supreme, and it should be followed through in taking any decision by government. Otherwise, a breach of any section of the law is an encouragement to impunity and anarchy by others who have not breached it yet.
That goes to the cause of even constitution change, not even amendment now. Isn't it time for us to have a constitution that even clearly defines what this national security is all about, rather than saying it should be left at the discretion of the president? Because that is what is causing all of this brouhaha. Isn't it time we stated that? Because we've had many court cases as regards the president hides under the national security clause to be able to do anything. Oh, it's in the interest of national security. In the interest of national security. Isn't it time the Constitution should spell it out? Let's know what is national security. Because it's very nebulous to me. Yeah,
some people have argued, remember the case of Asari Dokubo and the federal government of Nigeria, where the Supreme Court did hold that Asari Dokubo's application for bail, when the Supreme Court did hold that national security supersedes the fundamental rights. And a lot of people have read that interpretation upside down. Mind you, it is a court pronouncement. It is not a pronouncement of executive or the legislature. Asari Dokubo was brought before the court, and in argument for or against bail, the court said if it has been established that you are a threat to national security, then the court has the right to deny you bail and keep you for some time. The court did not say the president can, in his opinion, decide what national security is, even though that is left, the provision, like you said, is nebulous. But for me, a constitutional amendment without an attitudinal amendment will lead us nowhere. In clear violation of the provisions of the Constitution, the Attorney General had done what he is doing. And yet, do you need a constitutional amendment to tell the Attorney General that what you have done, it's wrong? Do you need a constitutional amendment to tell Mr. President that this is not the way to go? Do you need a constitutional amendment to tell the House of Rep that this action is a usurpation of your power? No. But because our actions, our attitude is that of the king can do no wrong, not minding that the king is supposed to govern by the dictate of the rule of the law, we now sit back and we're talking about constitutional amendment now. So, for me, let's first and foremost create that orientation where people will understand that they are supreme to the leaders that are leading them, because their leaders are not rulers. Once we understand that, if we now amend our constitution and talk about devolution of powers, talk about state policing, talk about state of origin and all of that, it will make meaning to us and participation of electoral participation. If you like, define clearly what national security is about in the Constitution. Those that will see violate it will violate it. I agree, but it is not something you can in one line or two lines define. You have to, that power should be donated to the court to interpret. So that means for the president to say this is a threat to national security, like I said earlier on, you must have recourse back to the court for interpretation of what it is, which is what it is supposed to be, which is what happens in other society, which is the intendment of the drafters of the Constitution.
Well, Liborous, before we go, what would be your advice to all the persons who have defied the Attorney General's directive, or if you like, the federal government's directive, and threat that those who continue to use Twitter will be prosecuted? Well, I mean, some people have said, we don't care, we will go ahead, we will use it. You can come and arrest all of us. But you know, in this country, anything is possible.
What I would advise, I would gladly represent anybody free if the courts are open. But the courts are not functional, and we had seen, you don't fight a bull in a china shop, because the bull will destroy whatever it's therein. You guide the bull out. So what I will advise is restraint. Like some persons have complied under duress. And so it is also easy, it's very convenient for us also to, because this order is baseless. But then let's also be careful, because you are dealing with a government that is draconian. You're dealing with a government that can kill and deny that people died. You're dealing with a government that can lie on barefaced lies and tell you that, you know, you can't do anything about it. And so that's why we need to be careful. What we should do is we should insist that INEC opens portals for voters registration. Let us massively register and participate in the forthcoming election, because that is the only opportunity that we have to actually choose whether who governs us is the right person or the wrong person, like Nigerians did in 2015. But until that, as we speak now, I do not have hope that the current set of leaders that we have in Nigeria, they've done it consistently for 6 years. And so I don't expect, even though I pray that they change, but I don't expect that in the next 2 years, they are going to have a different tactics or approach. The courts are not open. If the courts were open, I'll say, yes, when they charge them, we'll go to court and apply for their bail. But they are not. So let us exercise some form of restraint.
Well, thank you very much, Liborous Oshoma, for joining us today on The Morning Show. Thank you very much indeed.